close your eyes for just a moment. Imagine you are standing beside the great Nile River. The year is 1350 BCE. The sun has already begun to drop behind the limestone cliffs, painting the sky in deep amber and rose. The air smells of lotus blossoms, warm earth, and something sweet and herbal drifting from the open windows of a stone house nearby. Inside that house, a woman is kneeling beside a clay basin, slowly, carefully, working something through her long dark hair. Her fingers move in slow, deliberate circles. Her eyes are closed. The sound of water trickling is the only sound in the room, and in this single, quiet moment, you are witnessing one of the oldest beauty rituals in the entire history of human civilization. Tonight, we are not going to talk about wars. We are not going to talk about pharaohs conquering lands or armies marching across burning deserts. Tonight, we are going to do something far more intimate. We are going to step inside the daily lives of real ancient Egyptian people, the farmers, the priests, the noble women, the servants, the children, and we are going to discover something that every single one of them had in common. Something so ordinary, so personal, and yet so fascinatingly different from everything you know today. We are going to discover how the ancient Egyptians washed their hair, what they used instead of shampoo, why cleanliness was not just about hygiene for them but about the soul itself, and why their hair rituals were so sophisticated, so layered, so deeply human that once you hear all of it tonight, you will never look at your own morning routine the same way again. So settle in. Pull your blanket a little closer. Let your breathing slow down, because tonight's story is long, it is warm, it is deeply peaceful, and it is absolutely true. Every single detail you are about to hear comes from real archaeological discoveries, real ancient texts, real paintings found on the walls of tombs that have been sealed for over 3,000 years. This is real history, quiet history, the kind of history that whispers to you instead of shouting. And the best part, you do not need to go anywhere. You do not need to do anything. Just listen. Just breathe. And let ancient Egypt come to you. Let us begin at the very beginning. Let us begin with water. The Nile River was not just a river to the ancient Egyptians. It was life itself. It was the reason their civilization existed at all. Every year, without fail, the Nile flooded its banks, leaving behind a thick layer of rich black silt that made their farmland unbelievably fertile. They called this black land Kemet, and the Nile's water was sacred. It was pure. It was the gift of the gods. So it makes perfect sense that when the ancient Egyptians thought about cleanliness, about washing their bodies, washing their hair, washing away the dust and heat of another long Egyptian day, the Nile was where it all began. Most ordinary Egyptians, the farmers, the craftsmen, the lower classes who made up the vast majority of the population, they washed in the Nile itself. They waded into its shallows in the early morning or the cool of the evening, and they let the current pull the dust from their skin and the grime from their hair. But this was only the very first step, because the ancient Egyptians were not satisfied with simply rinsing. They wanted something more. They wanted their hair to feel clean in a way that plain water alone could never achieve. And so they turned to the extraordinary natural world around them to find what we would now call cleansing agents. One of the most widely used cleansing substances in ancient Egypt was something called natron. If you have never heard of natron before, let yourself picture a naturally occurring salt, a white, powdery mineral found in dried lake beds throughout Egypt, particularly in a region called Wadi el Natron. Natron is a mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, with small amounts of sodium chloride and sodium sulfate mixed in. To the ancient Egyptians, natron was one of the most versatile and important substances in existence. They used it in religious rituals. They used it to preserve food. They used it in the mummification process. Natron was packed around and inside the bodies of the dead to dry them out and preserve them for eternity. But they also used it in something far more everyday. They used it to wash. When mixed with water, natron creates a mildly alkaline solution that is genuinely effective at dissolving oils and lifting dirt from hair and skin. Ancient Egyptian women and men would dissolve small amounts of natron in water, work it through their hair, massage it into the scalp, and then rinse it clean with more water. The result was hair that was genuinely cleaner than plain water could achieve. It was not as gentle as a modern shampoo, certainly. Natron is a fairly strong alkaline substance, and regular use would have stripped some of the natural oils from the hair. But the Egyptians had solutions for that too, as we will discover a little later in our story tonight. Alongside natron, the ancient Egyptians also used a substance that would perhaps surprise you even more. They used ash. Specifically, the ash left behind after burning plant matter, reeds, grasses, wood. When ash is mixed with water, it creates a lye solution, which is similarly alkaline and similarly effective at cutting through oil and grime. This kind of ash and water mixture is, in a very real sense, one of the earliest forms of soap ever used by human beings. And the Egyptians were using it thousands of years before the Romans, thousands of years before the Europeans, thousands of years before most of the rest of the world had figured out the same trick. There was also something called kaifi, a complex mixture originally created for burning as incense in temples, but whose ingredients included castor oil, honey, wine, raisins, and various aromatic resins. While kaifi in its full form was primarily a ceremonial substance, many of its individual components were incorporated into personal grooming preparations. The Egyptians understood intuitively that different plant substances had different properties. Some cleaned, some conditioned, some smelled beautiful, some protected the hair and scalp from the brutal Egyptian sun. And now, as your body grows heavier and your thoughts grow quieter, let us go deeper. Let us step inside the actual daily routine of an ancient Egyptian and follow them through their hair-washing ritual from beginning to end. Picture an ordinary morning in the city of Thebes, roughly 3,000 years ago. The city is already stirring before dawn, bakers lighting their ovens, priests beginning their prayers, children chasing geese through the narrow mud-brick lanes. Our subject today is a woman named Nefertari, not the famous queen, but a real, ordinary woman, a weaver's wife who lives in a comfortable but modest home near the east bank of the Nile. She has 4 children, a small herb garden on her roof, and hair that falls in thick dark waves to the middle of her back. Nefertari wakes before the sun is fully up. The house is cool at this hour. The thick mud brick walls that trapped the heat of yesterday have now radiated most of it away through the night. She sits up on her sleeping mat and reaches for the clay pot of water she left beside her bed the evening before. First she drinks. Then she washes her face with a small wet cloth. And then she begins the ritual she performs every few days, the ritual that the heat and dust of Egyptian life makes absolutely necessary. She moves to the small courtyard at the center of her home, where a larger basin of water has been sitting overnight in the coolness. Beside it are several small clay jars and a folded piece of linen. She kneels beside the basin and begins to work loose the cloth that binds her hair. For sleeping, like most Egyptian women of her class, she has kept her hair braided or wrapped to protect it. Now she unwinds it slowly, running her fingers through the length of it, checking its condition, feeling for tangles, for dryness, for the slight stiffness that tells her it is time. She reaches first for the small jar of natron solution. She has mixed this herself the day before, a careful pinch of the white mineral powder dissolved in a cup of Nile water, left to fully dissolve overnight. She pours a small amount into her palm. Less than you might imagine, the Egyptians were careful with their cleansing agents because they understood that too much could damage the hair, and she works it through her hair section by section, starting at the roots and moving to the ends with slow, deliberate strokes. Her fingers make small circles at her scalp. This, too, was understood intuitively, that the scalp itself needed attention, that the roots of the hair were where oil and dust accumulated most. She works in silence for several minutes. The courtyard is quiet. A pigeon walks along the top of the garden wall. The first pale light of sunrise is beginning to touch the highest rooftops of Thebes. There is something almost meditative about this process, the slow rhythm of her fingers, the cool water, the faint mineral scent of the natron, the way the tension of sleep gradually releases from her neck and shoulders as her arms move. When she is satisfied that she has worked the natron through every section of her hair, She leans forward over the basin and begins to rinse. This takes several passes. She cups the water in both hands and pours it slowly through her hair, then repeats again, until the water running off her hair runs clear and the alkaline tingle of the natron has been completely neutralized. She uses the folded linen to press the excess water from her hair, never wringing or rubbing, but pressing section by section in the careful way that Egyptian women had learned preserved the hair's smoothness and prevented tangles. But she is not finished. The cleaning is only the first half of the ritual. Now comes the second half, the conditioning, the scenting, the protection. And this is where ancient Egyptian hair care becomes truly extraordinary, truly fascinating, and truly unlike anything you might have expected. She reaches for the second jar. This one is smaller, with a tight-fitting stopper sealed with a little ring of beeswax. When she works the stopper free, a warm, rich scent rises from the jar, something between flowers and sweetness and something faintly woody underneath. Inside the jar is an oil specifically, a preparation of castor oil that has been infused with the petals of blue lotus flowers. She pours a very small amount, a few drops, into her palm, rubs her palms together to warm it, and begins to work it through her damp hair from the mid-lengths to the ends. She does not apply it to her scalp, because she understands, as Egyptian women had understood for generations, that the scalp produces its own oils and does not need supplementing. But the ends of the hair, the oldest and most fragile parts, those benefit greatly from a little protection. The castor oil she is using was pressed from the seeds of the Ricinus communis plant, which grew abundantly throughout Egypt and along the Nile Valley. Castor oil is remarkably thick and rich. It coats the hair shaft smoothly, locks in moisture, prevents breakage, and adds a visible shine that, in the bright Egyptian sunlight, would have made hair look spectacularly beautiful. The Egyptians had used castor oil for centuries before Nefertari's time, not just for hair but for skin, for lamp fuel, for medicine, for ritual anointing. But for hair specifically, it was prized above almost everything else. Ancient medical papyri, real documents that survive to this day, list castor oil as a remedy for hair loss, for promoting hair growth, for strengthening weak hair, and for restoring luster to hair that has been damaged by sun and wind. Now, while Nefertari is a fictional individual, everything she is doing is drawn directly from real archaeological and textual evidence. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest and most comprehensive medical documents ever discovered, dating to roughly 1550 BCE, contains dozens of recipes and treatments specifically for hair, preparations made from castor oil, hippopotamus fat, ibis fat, snake fat, goose fat, and a fascinating range of plant substances including fenugreek, onion, and the fruit of the juniper tree. These are not myths. These are real prescriptions, written by real Egyptian physicians, for real Egyptian patients who wanted real results. The Edwin Smith Papyrus similarly contains references to hair treatments, and the medical knowledge it encodes is sophisticated enough that modern scholars have been genuinely impressed by how accurately the ancient Egyptians understood the relationship between scalp health, nutrition, and hair quality. They did not have our modern vocabulary, they did not have our molecular biology, but they had thousands of years of careful observation, and they had drawn conclusions that were, in many cases, genuinely correct. Let us talk for a moment about something that might surprise you. When you picture ancient Egyptian hairstyles, you probably picture something elaborate. Long dark wigs, braids woven with gold beads, great complicated ceremonial constructions. And you would not be wrong. The ancient Egyptians were absolutely devoted to elaborate hair aesthetics. But the truth of their daily hair care is rather more quiet and rather more intimate than those grand ceremonial images suggest. For most ordinary Egyptians on most ordinary days, the hair care routine was simple, rhythmic, and deeply habitual. Men often kept their natural hair short, very short in many cases, or even shaved entirely. Not because they did not care about their appearance, but because in the brutal Egyptian heat, a shaved or closely cropped head was simply more comfortable. The warmth and the dust that were constant features of Egyptian daily life made long natural hair a maintenance challenge, and many men simply chose to minimize that challenge by minimizing the hair itself. When they wanted elaborate hair for ceremonies or public occasions, they wore wigs, and we will talk about those wigs in wonderful detail a little later, because the wigs themselves have a hair care story of their own. For Egyptian women, the situation was more varied. Women of the lower and middle classes often kept their natural hair at a manageable length, shoulder length to mid-back, and maintained it with the kind of routine we have just followed Nefertari through. Women of the upper classes and nobility might keep longer, more elaborately dressed natural hair, or might supplement their natural hair with hairpieces and wigs for formal occasions, while maintaining a simpler personal routine at home. Children, and this is a detail that always makes people pause when they first hear it, Egyptian children, both boys and girls, were often given a distinctive hairstyle called the side lock of youth. The rest of the head was shaved completely smooth, and a single long lock of hair was left on one side, usually the right, allowed to grow long and sometimes braided or curled at the end. This was not just fashion. This was deeply symbolic. The side lock of youth was associated with the god Horus as a child, Horus the Younger, the heir of Osiris, who was depicted in art with exactly this same hairstyle. By giving their children this cut, Egyptian parents were placing their children symbolically under the protection of Horus, marking them as young, as still growing, as not yet fully formed adults. When a boy or girl reached puberty, the side lock was ritually cut, and they were considered to have crossed the threshold into adulthood. The hair itself was a marker of time, of age, of divine protection. But let us return to our exploration of what went on to hair. Because we have talked about natron, and we have talked about castor oil, but the ancient Egyptians had a truly remarkable pharmacopoeia of hair care substances, and some of them are genuinely astonishing. One of the most important was a substance derived from an animal that is not particularly romantic, the hippopotamus. Hippopotamus fat, extracted and rendered from the thick subcutaneous layer of the animal's body, was prized in ancient Egypt as a hair treatment of particular power. It was thick, protective, and apparently very effective at coating the hair shaft and preventing moisture loss. It would have smelled rather strongly in its unprocessed form, which is why Egyptian preparations almost always combined it with aromatic plant resins and oils, frankincense, myrrh, juniper berry, to create something that was not only effective but also pleasant to use. Goose fat was similarly valued. Rendered carefully from the substantial fat deposits of geese, which were kept domestically throughout Egypt, it was lighter and more spreadable than hippopotamus fat and left the hair with a noticeable shine. It was also, interestingly, used as a remedy for hair loss. Ancient Egyptian medical texts describe applying goose fat to bald patches of the scalp as a treatment designed to stimulate new hair growth. Whether it worked in the way the Egyptians hoped is another question, but the intention was there, and the logic that moisturizing and protecting the scalp might create better conditions for hair to grow is not entirely unreasonable even by modern standards. Snake fat is another ingredient that appears repeatedly in ancient Egyptian hair preparations. This one is particularly striking to modern ears. The ancient Egyptians believed that the snake, with its ability to shed its entire skin and emerge renewed, possessed properties of renewal and regeneration that could be transferred to preparations made from its body. Snake fat applied to the scalp or hair was believed to promote regeneration, to encourage thinning hair to grow back, to strengthen weak or damaged hair, to restore what age or illness or grief had taken away. Whether this worked in any measurable sense is, of course, unlikely by modern science's standards. But it is a beautiful example of the way the ancient Egyptians wove their understanding of the natural world, their mythology, their spirituality, and their practical medicine into a single continuous fabric. For them, there was no sharp line between what worked physically and what worked spiritually. The snake fat was efficacious because the snake was powerful, and that power was real to them in a way that transcended what we would call the merely physical. Let us pause here for a moment and let the silence settle around you. Let your arms grow heavy. Let the weight of your body sink a little deeper into wherever you are resting. The story is long and full, and there is so much more to tell, and all of it will be here when you are ready to receive it. Just breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady. And we will continue. The ancient Egyptians also made considerable use of plant-based oils beyond castor oil. Moringa oil, pressed from the seeds of the moringa tree, sometimes called the miracle tree for the extraordinary range of its useful properties, was highly prized in ancient Egypt, particularly by the upper classes. Moringa oil has a remarkably long shelf life for a natural oil, resisting rancidity far longer than most alternatives, which made it very valuable in a hot climate where oils could quickly spoil. It was light, easily absorbed, and left the hair with a beautiful luster. Modern science has confirmed that moringa oil is genuinely rich in nutrients, oleic acid, behenic acid, vitamins, that are beneficial for hair health. The ancient Egyptians discovered this through observation and tradition thousands of years before any of those nutrients had names. Almond oil appears in ancient Egyptian records as well. Egypt had trade routes that stretched across the ancient world, to the Levant, to Nubia, to the mysterious land of Punt somewhere along the eastern coast of Africa. And through those trade routes came goods that were not native to Egypt itself. Almonds were cultivated in the Levant and the eastern Mediterranean, and were imported into Egypt, where their oil was valued for both skin and hair. Applied to the hair after washing, almond oil would have provided a light, non-greasy conditioning effect, leaving the hair soft and manageable without weighing it down. And then there were the plant additives, the herbs and botanicals that the Egyptians added to their oils and cleansing preparations, not just for fragrance but for specific intended effects. Fenugreek seeds, soaked and ground into a paste, appear in ancient Egyptian hair loss remedies, and modern research has found that fenugreek does indeed contain compounds with some evidence of promoting hair growth, so perhaps the ancient Egyptians were onto something real. Onion juice, which sounds rather unpleasant, also appears as a hair growth remedy, and again, modern research on the sulfur compounds in onion and their potential effect on the hair follicle has produced some genuinely interesting results. The ancient Egyptians may have had no idea why onion juice might help hair grow, but they had observed that it seemed to, and they recorded that observation. Henna is perhaps the most dramatic and visually striking plant substance used in ancient Egyptian hair care. Henna, derived from the leaves of the Lawsonia inermis plant, which was cultivated throughout the Nile Valley and imported from the Levant, leaves a rich reddish-brown stain on the hair when applied as a paste. Ancient Egyptian artworks sometimes depict individuals with hair that has a distinctly reddish tint. An analysis of actual mummified hair samples has confirmed the presence of henna in some Egyptian hair finds. Henna was used not only for its color but for its conditioning properties. It coats the hair shaft, adds body and thickness, and was believed to have protective and purifying qualities as well. Applying henna was a slow, careful, multi-hour process, and in a culture that valued leisure and ritual, it was probably a social one as well. Women applying henna to each other's hair in shared courtyards, talking and laughing and passing the time while the preparation did its work. The color that henna produced, that warm, earthy red-brown, was considered beautiful in ancient Egypt, and some individuals apparently sought to enhance or deepen it by using additional plant materials alongside the henna. Black henna preparations, using indigo as well as henna, could produce darker colors, and combinations could be adjusted to produce a range of shades from bright copper to deep auburn to near black. This was, in the truest sense of the word, the world's oldest hair dye, but not everyone who colored their hair in ancient Egypt was trying to enhance its natural color. Some were trying to hide something. Because just as people do today, the ancient Egyptians sometimes went gray, and they had complicated feelings about it. There is a striking passage in an ancient Egyptian medical papyrus that describes a preparation specifically designed to turn white or gray hair black again. The recipe involves a mixture of the blood of a black bull. The blackness of the bull was symbolically important, boiled, and then mixed with various plant substances, applied to the gray hair and left to work. This preparation almost certainly did not work in any lasting or reliable way, but the fact that someone took the time to write it down, to record it as a medical treatment, tells us something deeply human and deeply touching about the ancient Egyptians. They were people who worried about getting old. They were people who looked at their graying hair and wished it were otherwise. They were people who tried things in the hope they might help. 3,000 years separate us from them, but in this small, intimate anxiety, the distance collapses entirely. There were also preparations described as promoting the growth of new hair on balding scalps. One particularly elaborate recipe from the Ebers Papyrus calls for a mixture including hippopotamus fat, crocodile fat, snake fat, ibis fat, and the fat of the oryx. 5 different animal fats combined and applied to the affected area. The sheer number of ingredients suggests this was a serious medical preparation, not a casual folk remedy, and it was presumably applied by a physician rather than at home. Whether any of the 5 animal fats contributed anything useful to the cause of hair growth, we cannot say with certainty. But the attempt was earnest, and the medicine was real. Now let us leave the world of individual hair care for a moment and step into a larger space, the world of the ancient Egyptian temple. Because in the temple, hair was not just a personal matter, it was a spiritual one. And the rules governing the hair of priests and priestesses were extraordinarily specific and extraordinarily demanding. Egyptian priests, the men and women who served in the great temples of Amun, of Ra, of Isis, of Ptah, were required to maintain a state of ritual purity at all times while they were in service. This meant multiple daily washings of the body, strict dietary rules, sexual abstinence during periods of temple service, and specific requirements regarding the hair. Male priests in service were required to shave their heads entirely, not just cut their hair short, but remove every hair from the scalp. They were also required to remove every hair from their entire bodies, including eyebrows and eyelashes, as part of the purity regime. This extreme depilation was understood as a form of purification, a removing of everything that might harbor impurity, a making clean of the physical vessel that served the divine. The razors used by priests, and by Egyptians generally for body hair removal, were surprisingly sophisticated. Bronze razors and later iron razors, with carefully shaped curved blades designed to work smoothly against the scalp or skin, have been found throughout Egypt in great numbers. Depilation was taken seriously enough that professional barbers existed in ancient Egypt, setting up in public spaces, near temples, near markets, along the busier streets, and offering their services to anyone who needed them. Some barbers seem to have been quite prosperous, judging by the quality of the equipment found in their contexts. Priests who shaved their heads then anointed their bare scalps with sacred oils, preparations that combined fragrant resins like frankincense and myrrh with carrier oils. Applied in a ritual that was as much prayer as grooming. The anointing of the head was an act of consecration, a marking of the body as belonging in its service to the divine. The oil was not just moisturizer for a newly shaved scalp. It was a substance that transformed the person wearing it, that marked them as different, as set apart, as serving a purpose greater than the ordinary. For the great festivals of the Egyptian religious calendar, even ordinary people might have their hair anointed with fragrant oils as part of the celebration. There are ancient banquet scenes painted on tomb walls, extraordinary survivals that allow us to peer directly into a specific moment of ancient Egyptian life, in which party guests are shown with what appear to be cones of a waxy, fragrant substance balanced on top of their wigs or hair. Scholars have debated exactly what these cones were, but the most widely accepted interpretation is that they were cones of scented fat solid at room temperature, but designed to melt slowly in the warmth of a banquet hall, releasing fragrant oils that ran down over the hair and shoulders throughout the evening, keeping the guests' hair beautifully perfumed for the duration of the party. This is one of those details of ancient Egyptian life that is simultaneously completely foreign and completely recognizable. We wear perfume to parties. They wore scented fat cones. The impulse to smell beautiful for a social occasion, to feel festive and adorned, to signal through scent that something special is happening is identical. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift gently like those fragrant oils spreading slowly through dark Egyptian hair. We are not in any hurry tonight. The story is long and the night is quiet and there is so much more to discover. Let us talk now about wigs. Because the wig is perhaps the most distinctive and most fascinating element of ancient Egyptian hair culture, and to understand it properly, we need to understand not just what wigs were but why they existed, who wore them, how they were made, and crucially, how they were cleaned and maintained. The ancient Egyptians wore wigs for several interconnected reasons. The first, as we have already touched on, was practical. In the intense heat of the Egyptian climate, a shaved or closely cropped head was simply more comfortable. The scalp could be kept scrupulously clean, parasites had nowhere to hide, and the Egyptian sun beat down on skin rather than a thick mass of insulating hair. But for occasions that required a more impressive personal appearance, ceremonies, festivals, important social gatherings, formal meetings, bare heads were not always appropriate. The wig provided the best of both worlds. You could keep your own hair short or absent for practical comfort and hygiene, and then put on an elaborate wig when the occasion demanded it, then take it off again when the occasion was over. The second reason was aesthetic. Egyptian wigs could be magnificent, elaborate constructions of real human hair, sometimes supplemented with horsehair or vegetable fibers, braided and woven into complex patterns, adorned with gold beads, faience jewelry, flowers, and ribbons. No natural head of hair, no matter how healthy and thick, could be styled into the kinds of elaborate architectural shapes that Egyptian wigmakers routinely achieved. The wig was a fashion technology that allowed a level of hair artistry that would simply not have been possible with natural hair alone. The third reason was social signaling. The quality of your wig, its thickness, its length, the quality of the hair used, the elaborateness of its styling, was a direct signal of your wealth and status. Ordinary people might have simple, shorter wigs made of lower quality materials. Wealthy individuals and nobility might have multiple wigs for different occasions, stored carefully in specially designed wig boxes, maintained by personal servants whose specific job included the care of the wigs. The pharaoh's ceremonial wigs were extraordinarily elaborate, and images of them survive in tomb paintings and sculptures. Now, and this is where the hair care story of wigs becomes particularly interesting. Wigs needed to be cleaned and maintained just like natural hair, and the methods for doing so were similarly sophisticated. Real human hair wigs were cleaned using water and sometimes mild natron solutions, carefully and gently, to avoid damaging the delicate construction of braids and set curls. They were then conditioned with oil preparations, the same castor oil and moringa oil and beeswax preparations used on natural hair, to keep the hair shaft flexible and prevent breakage. They were set and shaped using preparations that functioned as ancient styling products. Beeswax was the most common, applied while soft and warm, used to define braids, set curls, and hold the overall shape of the wig's elaborate construction. When not being worn, wigs were stored on stands, some of which have been found in tombs, because Egyptians wanted their wigs available in the afterlife as well, and wrapped in linen to protect them from dust. This is meticulous, devoted care for objects that were simultaneously functional, aesthetic, and status-laden, and it tells us a great deal about how seriously the ancient Egyptians took their personal appearance and the maintenance of that appearance. The craftspeople who made wigs and wigmakers whose workshops have been archaeologically identified in some Egyptian cities were skilled artisans. They sourced human hair from a variety of sources, including presumably the shaved-off hair of ordinary Egyptians, paid for by the wigmakers and then cleaned, sorted by quality, processed, and incorporated into the final product. The process of making a high-quality Egyptian wig was labor-intensive and technically demanding. The hair had to be attached to a base of woven plant fiber or linen mesh, then braided or curled in intricate patterns that would hold their shape through repeated wearing and cleaning. A truly fine Egyptian wig was not a cheap or easily replaced object. It was an investment, and it was treated accordingly. There is something wonderful to sit with here. The idea that across thousands of years, in a culture so different from our own in its language, its religion, its politics, its understanding of the cosmos, human beings were sitting in small workshops carefully braiding and weaving hair into beautiful objects designed to make the person who wore them feel attractive and powerful and socially confident. The wigmaker of ancient Thebes and the hairdresser of any modern city are separated by millennia and everything else, but the fundamental transaction, a person with skill and time and materials, serving another person's desire to look their best, is utterly, entirely unchanged. Let us drift a little further into the world of children and family life in ancient Egypt, because the way a culture treats its children's hair tells us something particularly intimate about its values and its daily rhythms. We have already spoken of the sidelock of youth, that distinctive ritual hairstyle of Egyptian children. But beyond this formal, symbolic element, the daily hair care of Egyptian children was something that archaeological evidence and textual sources allow us to partially reconstruct, and it is a warm and human picture. Egyptian mothers are depicted in art combing their children's hair. Fine-toothed combs, some extraordinarily beautiful, carved from bone, ivory, or wood, decorated with images of animals or geometric patterns, have been found in domestic contexts throughout Egypt. These combs served not only to detangle and style hair, but also to remove lice, which were a persistent challenge in any densely populated ancient community. Lice combs, narrow-toothed, designed specifically for lice removal, have also been found. An examination of the hair found on Egyptian mummies has confirmed that lice were indeed a reality of Egyptian life that people actively managed. The hair of children was treated with oils to keep it soft and manageable, castor oil again, or sometimes olive oil when it was available, always in small amounts carefully worked through the hair with patient fingers. Children's hair was braided and bound to keep it tidy, and to minimize the maintenance needed on a daily basis. And the ritual shaving of the sidelock at puberty, the cutting away of childhood, was, based on artistic and textual evidence, probably a social occasion, a moment acknowledged and marked by family and perhaps community, a real transition recognized by a physical, visible change. The hair was not just decoration. It was chronology. It was memory. It was the body's visible record of time passing. Now, you may be wondering, as we drift deeper into this ancient world, about scent. We have mentioned fragrant oils and perfumed fats and incense resins. And we have spoken of the importance of smell in Egyptian hair preparations. But let us spend a little time specifically on the question of how the ancient Egyptians thought about fragrance, because their relationship with scent was extraordinarily sophisticated and deeply meaningful. To the ancient Egyptians, good fragrance was not just pleasant. It was an indicator of spiritual purity and divine favor. The gods were believed to emit perfect, transcendent fragrance, a concept expressed in religious texts as the smell of incense, of flowers, of the lotus. The pharaoh, who was divine, was associated with specific sacred fragrances. Temples were perfumed with incense continuously, creating an atmosphere of divine presence through the medium of smell. And by extension, to smell beautiful, to anoint your hair and skin with fragrant oils, was to participate, in a small and human way, in that divine quality of fragrance. It was not vanity. It was aspiration. It was a way of reaching toward the sacred through the very ordinary and very human act of making yourself smell good. The flowers most associated with Egyptian hair and body fragrance were the lotus, both the blue lotus, Nymphea caerulea, and the white lotus, which appear endlessly in Egyptian art, held in hands, tucked behind ears, woven into garlands worn around the neck, floated in the hair. The lotus was sacred to the Egyptians in a way that went far beyond simple aesthetics. It was the flower that opened with the rising sun and closed with its setting, a visible metaphor of creation and rebirth, of Ra's daily journey across the sky. To wear a lotus flower in your hair was to wear a symbol of the sun itself, of new beginnings, of life emerging from the primordial waters of creation. Beyond lotus, roses of various kinds, jasmine, lily, and the delicate white blossoms of the moringa tree were all used in perfume preparations that could be applied to hair. There are ancient Egyptian recipes for solid perfumes, scented waxes and fats that could be warmed between the palms and worked through the hair, leaving it fragrant for hours or even days. These preparations were not simple. Some of them, particularly the most prized preparations used by the wealthy, contained dozens of ingredients, multiple aromatic plant resins, multiple flower essences, animal musks, precious imported materials, and their production was a skilled and specialized craft. The word chemistry actually derives from the ancient Greek word chemia, which some scholars believe comes from the ancient Egyptian word for Egypt itself, Kemet, the Black Land. Whether or not this etymology is entirely correct, it captures something real about the ancient Egyptians' relationship with the making and transformation of substances. They were experimenters, innovators, careful observers of cause and effect. Their perfumers were, in a very real sense, early chemists, understanding through practice and accumulated knowledge how to combine and transform natural materials into something greater than their individual parts. Let the words wash over you slowly. Let them carry you. The night is long and the story is generous, and there is no need to hold every detail. Just let it flow like Nile water, like warm oil spreading slowly through dark hair in a quiet Egyptian courtyard before the sun has fully risen. Let us now turn to something that connects all of this, the social dimension of hair care in ancient Egypt. Because what we have been describing throughout this long story is not a solitary, private activity performed in isolation. It was, in ancient Egypt as in so many cultures, a profoundly social ritual. Hair care was done together, and in that togetherness, in that shared attention and shared time, there was something important happening. The communal aspect of Egyptian hair grooming is visible in Egyptian art from many different periods and contexts. In tomb paintings from the New Kingdom, that remarkable period between roughly 1550 and 1070 BCE, when Egypt was at the height of its power and artistic achievement, we see women in garden settings, grooming each other's hair. We see servants attending to their mistress's hair, working slowly and carefully with combs and oils. We see family scenes in which the intimacy of grooming is used by the artist to express affection and trust between individuals. To let someone do your hair was to trust them. To tend someone else's hair was to care for them in a fundamental, bodily, intimate way. This was understood across Egyptian society in ways that modern life has largely dismantled. We now wash our own hair alone in a private shower, and this is so normal to us that we barely notice it as a choice. But for most of human history, and the ancient Egyptians are a beautiful example of this, hair care was communal. It required a partner or a group. You could wash your own hair alone, but for the combing, the braiding, the oiling, the arranging, you needed someone else. And that necessity created time, created proximity, created conversation, laughter, silence, the kind of companionable quiet that comes from doing an intimate physical task together. The hair care session was, in its way, a form of social bonding, as fundamental and as important as the shared meal. In the homes of wealthy Egyptians, hair care was part of the daily routine managed by personal servants, men and women whose job included the care of their employer's appearance. These were not necessarily lowly positions. A skilled hairdresser in a noble household was a trusted member of the domestic staff, privy to private moments, responsible for the physical presentation of their employer in public, and presumably proud of the quality of their work. Some Egyptian tomb depictions show hairdressers working with evident care and focus, using long-handled combs with an expertise that the detailed rendering of the image makes legible even across 3,000 years. Barbers, as we have mentioned, worked publicly, in outdoor spaces, in workshops, serving customers who came to them for shaving, hair cutting, hair care, and the removal of body hair. The barber shop as a social space, a place where men gathered and talked while being attended to, is often thought of as a modern or at least relatively recent institution. But the archaeological and artistic evidence suggests that its equivalent existed in ancient Egypt, a public space where grooming services were rendered and social life happened simultaneously. The specific conversations are lost, of course, but the laughter probably was not so very different. Now let us spend some time with something that might be the most remarkable aspect of ancient Egyptian hair care, the extent to which it was documented, theorized, medically systematized, and passed down across generations. Because the ancient Egyptians did not just do hair care. They thought about it. They wrote about it. They argued about what worked and what did not. And their written records, preserved by the extraordinary aridity of the Egyptian climate, which kept fragile papyrus documents intact for thousands of years in a way that would have been impossible almost anywhere else on Earth. Allow us to read their thoughts directly. The Ebers Papyrus, which we have already mentioned, is one of the oldest surviving medical texts in the world. Dating to approximately 1550 BCE, it contains nearly 900 medical entries covering everything from dental problems to mental illness to gastrointestinal conditions to surgical procedures. And woven throughout this enormous document are entries specifically concerning the hair, its growth, its loss, its color, its texture, and the treatments available for every condition that might affect it. This was medical writing at the highest level of Egyptian sophistication, compiled from sources that were already ancient when the Ebers Papyrus was written. The hair care knowledge it encodes is not folk knowledge or kitchen wisdom, though those certainly existed too. It is the systematized, organized knowledge of a medical profession. The Egyptian physician who treated hair loss was not a quack or a salesman. He was a highly trained professional operating within a sophisticated system of medical education and practice. His treatments for hair loss might not work by the standards of modern pharmacology, but his approach, take a careful history, observe the problem, prescribe a specific preparation, instruct the patient on how to apply it, was methodologically sound. And some of his ingredients, as we have seen, have genuine chemical or biological properties that make their inclusion in hair preparations less surprising than it might seem. There is a particular entry in the Ebers Papyrus that has captivated scholars for generations. It describes a preparation for hair loss that involves the fat of a lion, a hippopotamus, a crocodile, a snake, an ibis, and a goat, 6 different animals, their fats combined and applied to the scalp. The scholar reading this today might initially assume it is pure superstition, but the closer you look, the more interesting it becomes. These are not 6 randomly chosen animals. They are 6 animals that were all symbolically associated in different ways with power, with regeneration, with the divine. The lion, solar, powerful, the emblem of the pharaoh. The hippopotamus, associated with Tawert, goddess of childbirth and new life. The crocodile, Sobek, god of the Nile, of power, of fertility. The snake, renewal, shedding, transformation. The ibis, Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. The goat, fertility, abundance. This was not a random mixture. This was a deliberate symbolic construction designed to call on the specific powers of specific sacred animals to accomplish a specific goal. It was medicine and religion simultaneously, because in ancient Egypt there was, in the deepest sense, no difference. And so we arrive at one of the most important things that tonight's story has been quietly building toward. The ancient Egyptians cared for their hair not just because they wanted to look good, though they absolutely did, and not just for hygiene, though that too, but because hair care was connected to their entire understanding of what it meant to be a human being in a sacred world. To clean your hair was to purify yourself. To anoint your hair was to bless yourself. To style your hair was to present yourself, to the world and to the gods, as someone who had taken their place in the great ordered scheme of things seriously. Neglected hair was not just aesthetically displeasing in ancient Egypt. It was a spiritual signal, a sign that something was wrong, that the person was in mourning, in crisis, in a state of disorder that reflected or produced disorder in the world around them. This is why, in the accounts of Egyptian mourning practices, the undoing of hair, the loosening of bound braids, the refusal to wash or anoint the hair for the specified period of mourning was such a powerful and significant gesture. It was not just grief made visible. It was the deliberate withdrawal from the normal order of things, the marking of a rupture in the fabric of daily life. When the mourning period ended and the hair was washed and dressed again, that too was significant. It was a return. A re-entry into the world, a statement made with oil and comb and clean water that life continued. Let the story settle into you like warmth, like the weight of a blanket, like the slow deepening of evening into night. You have been traveling through ancient Egypt for a long time now, through its rivers and temples and homes and markets and ceremonies, and there is still more to see. But let yourself rest as you listen. Let the images come and go gently, like ripples on the Nile. Let us now venture into a particularly intimate corner of ancient Egyptian life, the bathing chamber, in the homes of those wealthy enough to have one. Because while most Egyptians washed in the Nile or in courtyard basins, the very wealthy had dedicated spaces for bathing, and these spaces tell us something fascinating about how hair care was elevated into genuine luxury. In the homes of wealthy Egyptians, and in the royal palaces, there were rooms specifically designed for bathing. These were not the elaborate tiled spaces of Roman bath culture. They were simpler, more intimate. Typically a small room with a slightly sloped stone or clay floor designed to drain water away, sometimes with a shallow basin or trough built in. But within these simple spaces, extraordinary things happened, and the equipment and preparations associated with them were often of great beauty and value. Archaeological excavations of Egyptian elite homes and palaces have turned up exquisite small vessels, alabaster jars, faience bottles, carved stone containers, that originally held beauty preparations including hair oils and perfumed creams. These vessels were themselves objects of art, sometimes shaped like animals, sometimes inscribed with the names of their owners or with small prayers and blessings. To hold one of these vessels, to feel the smoothness of the alabaster under your fingers, to catch the faint remaining trace of whatever fragrant oil it once contained. These are the moments when archaeological objects stop being artifacts and become memories. The bathing servant, the person responsible for the physical care of a wealthy Egyptian's hair and body, was a figure of genuine importance in the household. We know their role from pictorial evidence, but also from some textual sources that mention them in the context of household management. They would have been skilled in the preparation and application of the various oils and cleansing agents, knowledgeable about which preparations were appropriate for different conditions, trusted with the most private moments of their employer's day. The actual process of a high-status Egyptian hair washing session would have been something like this. The hair first dampened with water poured from a beautiful vessel, then worked with natron solution section by section and rinsed, then a second treatment with a lighter fragrant preparation to remove any remaining mineral residue from the natron, then the careful application of conditioning oil, combed through from roots to ends with a fine-toothed comb, section by section, the comb drawing the oil evenly through every strand. Then the slow styling, depending on the occasion. This might be as simple as smoothing the hair down and binding it, or as elaborate as the full construction of a formal court hairstyle, involving braiding, supplementary hairpieces, gold wire, beads, flowers, and finally the application of beeswax or a similar setting agent to hold the final form in place. For the pharaoh, the process was even more elaborate and was explicitly part of the daily ritual of the royal person. The pharaoh's morning toilet, their washing, anointing, dressing, and hair arrangement, was a ceremonially significant event, attended by specific officials and performed according to established procedures. To participate in the pharaoh's morning toilet was a mark of significant favor. The grooming of the king was not just personal hygiene. It was a ritual act of preparation, making the divine king ready to appear before the world and to perform the divine functions his role required. There is a beautiful detail in some ancient Egyptian records that describes the daily application of specific fragrant oils to the pharaoh's body, including a separate oil specifically for the head and hair, as part of a formal morning anointing sequence. Different oils for different parts of the body, each with specific symbolic as well as practical associations. The oil for the head, the seat of royal authority, the place where the divine crown rested, was particularly precious, particularly fragrant, and applied with particular care. This was not personal vanity. This was the maintenance of divinity in its human form. And yet, and this is something the best Egyptologists always emphasize, the pharaoh was human. Beneath the blue crown and the double crown, beneath the ceremonial wig and the kohl-lined eyes, there was a person who had bad hair days, who had a scalp that itched in the heat, who was probably as happy as anyone to have the formal ceremony of the morning toilet finished, and to simply exist for a moment in something quieter and more ordinary. The distance between the divine and the human in ancient Egypt was vast and carefully maintained. But the evidence of daily life, the combs, the oil jars, the natron pots, the lice combs, constantly collapses it. Whatever else the pharaoh was, they also washed their hair. Let us travel now to a different part of Egyptian society, the workmen's village at Deir el-Medina. This is one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites in the world, and one of the most intimate because it allows us to see ancient Egyptian daily life with unusual clarity and detail. Deir el-Medina was the village where the artisans and workers who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings lived with their families. Because their work was considered sensitive, they knew the locations and layouts of royal tombs. They lived in a walled, somewhat isolated community on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes. And this isolation, paradoxically, has preserved an extraordinary record of their daily lives. Enormous numbers of documents, written on ostraca, which are fragments of pottery or limestone used as convenient writing surfaces, have been found at Deir el-Medina, covering topics ranging from work records and legal disputes to personal letters and medical notes. And because these documents were written by and for working people, skilled craftsmen, but not the elite, they give us a uniquely unfiltered view of ordinary Egyptian life. Among the things we learn from Deir el-Medina is that the workers there took their personal appearance very seriously. They had access to oils and beauty preparations. They used natron for washing. They owned quality combs, and there is evidence of some of them purchasing or trading for specific beauty products that they valued. Workers were sometimes paid partly in goods rather than just grain, and among the goods that appear in ration or payment records are oils, including aromatic oils that had use in personal grooming as well as in lamps. We also learn that the workers at Deir el-Medina were not above taking time off from work for personal reasons, including, apparently, to deal with hair. There is a remarkable series of work absence records from the village in which workers recorded their reasons for not showing up on a given day. Among the listed reasons are illness, family bereavements, and, charmingly, the brewing of beer. There are also some days listed with reasons that translate roughly as wife is unwell or personal matters that probably encompass the full range of domestic life, including its grooming rituals. The women of Deir el-Medina, for whom we have somewhat less direct documentary evidence than for the men, were nonetheless clearly active agents in the beauty culture of their community. They had access to the same ostraca and used them to write about their lives, including some personal notes and even what appear to be early versions of household recipes. Their hair, visible in tomb paintings that some of their husbands helped create, was styled with evident care and attention, braided, adorned with small ornaments, oiled to a visible shine. These were not women who viewed their appearance as unimportant. These were women who found time, within the rhythms of working-class Egyptian domestic life, to maintain and take pride in how they looked. As the night deepens around you and your breathing slows further into the steady rhythm of approaching sleep, let us spend a little time with something particularly peaceful: the plants. The extraordinary world of Egyptian botanical hair care, the garden and the riverbank and the market and the trading ship, all contributing their particular green and fragrant gifts to the business of Egyptian hair. We have talked about castor oil and moringa oil and almond oil. But there were many more plant substances that appear in ancient Egyptian hair care traditions, and spending time with them is a kind of gentle meditation on the natural world, on the patience and generosity of plants, offering themselves to human use across uncountable millennia. The blue lotus, Nymphea caerulea, deserves particular attention. This flower, which the ancient Egyptians called session, was one of the most symbolically and practically important plants in their entire civilization. It grew abundantly in the marshes and slow backwaters of the Nile, its round leaves floating on the surface, its extraordinary blue flowers opening with mathematical precision at sunrise and closing again at sunset, day after day, season after season. To the Egyptians, this daily opening and closing made the lotus a living symbol of the sun's journey of Ra rising and setting, of creation and return. It appears in their art with a frequency that suggests genuine reverence and not just decorative habit. The lotus was also used practically. Its petals and buds were steeped in oil to create a scented preparation used in both religious ritual and personal grooming. The particular quality of blue lotus fragrance, warm, slightly sweet, with an underlying earthiness, was considered one of the most beautiful and sacred scents available, and its presence in hair oil preparations was both aesthetically and spiritually meaningful. The papyrus plant, so central to Egyptian civilization as a writing material, also had cosmetic and grooming uses. The root of the papyrus plant contains compounds with some antimicrobial properties, and extracts of papyrus root appear in some ancient Egyptian scalp preparations. Whether these preparations were effective in any measurable way we cannot say with certainty, but the inclusion of papyrus, a plant so deeply connected to Egyptian civilization, to writing, to knowledge, to the delta landscape that was the heart of Lower Egypt, in personal grooming preparations, suggests something of the intimate connection the Egyptians felt between the natural world around them and the practices of their daily lives. Kohl, of course, deserves a mention even in a story about hair rather than eyes, because the making and wearing of kohl, that famous Egyptian eye cosmetic, was part of the same culture of beauty and care that governed hair practices. Kohl was made from galena, a lead sulfide mineral, or from carbon black ground fine and mixed with oil or animal fat to create a paste that could be applied to the eyes with a stick or a small spatula. While kohl was primarily an eye cosmetic, the fat or oil base used to make it was sometimes the same as that used in hair preparations, and the aesthetic sensibility, the careful, deliberate enhancement of a specific feature to create a specific effect, was continuous across all aspects of Egyptian beauty culture. There is also the matter of wax, beeswax specifically. Beekeeping was practiced in ancient Egypt, and beeswax was a product of that practice that found its way into a remarkable range of applications. In hair care, beeswax was used as a styling product, softened by warmth, worked into specific sections of hair or wig, then allowed to cool and harden, holding a curl or braid or shaped end in place in a way that oil alone could not. Archaeological analysis of actual hair and wig specimens from Egyptian mummies and burials has found the chemical signature of beeswax in the hair, confirming that what we know from texts and images was genuinely practiced. The beeswax styling product is, in a very real sense, the direct ancestor of every hair wax, pomade, and styling product in the world today. The goal, to shape the hair and hold it in a specific form, has not changed at all. Only the packaging has. Let us drift now toward the end of our long journey through ancient Egyptian hair culture, but not before we spend some time with one more fascinating and underexplored aspect of the story. What happened to Egyptian hair in the afterlife, or at least in the preparations for it? The ancient Egyptians were famously, elaborately, devotedly preoccupied with death. Not because they were morbid, quite the opposite. They loved life with a passionate intensity that makes their mourning practices and funerary preparations not expressions of death obsession, but of a desperate, beautiful wish to continue experiencing the good things of living existence beyond the boundary of physical death. They wanted the afterlife to be continuous with life. They wanted to eat the foods they had enjoyed, to sit in the garden under the acacia tree, to hear the music they had loved, to see the faces of the people they had cared for. And they wanted their hair to look good. This sounds almost comic when stated plainly, but it is true and it is touching and it is supported by direct archaeological evidence. Egyptian burials across all periods and social classes, to the extent that the deceased or their families could afford it, included grooming equipment. Combs were placed in tombs. Oil vessels were placed in tombs. Coal pots were placed in tombs. Mirrors were placed in tombs. Razors were placed in tombs. The equipment of daily personal care was considered as essential for the afterlife as food and water and furniture. Because in the afterlife, as in life, a person needed to maintain themselves. They needed to be clean. They needed to smell beautiful. They needed their hair to look as it should. Some of the most extraordinary hair-related finds from Egyptian archaeology come from the tombs of individuals whose bodies have been so well preserved by the mummification process that their hair survives intact 3,000 years later, and the analysis of that hair tells remarkable stories. The hair of ancient Egyptian mummies has been studied with modern forensic and chemical techniques, and the results are genuinely astonishing. Researchers have found traces of plant oils, animal fats, beeswax, and henna in the hair of mummies from various periods. They have found evidence of deliberate styling, curls and braids set with wax preparations that are still partially visible after 3 millennia. They have found lice eggs in some specimens, testament to the universal humanity of even the most elaborately prepared ancient individual. And they have found, in the hair of some mummies, evidence of what appears to have been a deliberate application of fat-based preservative preparations specifically at or around the time of death, as if someone had taken care, in the hours before or after death, to make sure the person's hair was properly dressed and treated, one final time. One particularly remarkable find comes from the Dakhla Oasis, a remote site in Egypt's western desert. Mummies found there from the Roman period, roughly the first few centuries CE, when Egypt was under Roman rule but still maintained much of its traditional culture, have hair preserved in extraordinary condition, with styling preparations still chemically detectable. Some of these individuals had their hair dressed with fat-based preparations containing specific aromatic plant compounds that would have been deliberately chosen for their fragrance. Someone had prepared these people for eternity with the same care and attention to scent and appearance that they would have given them for a festival or a banquet. The love expressed in that act, the oiling and arranging of a dead person's hair so that they might face whatever came next looking as themselves, as beautiful as possible, as cared for as possible, reaches across 2,000 years and touches something very deep. And now we are nearing the end of our night's journey. But before we return to the present, let us spend a few quiet moments considering what all of this means. What ancient Egyptian hair care, in all its richness and practicality and spirituality and humanity, tells us about the people who practiced it. It tells us they were people who paid attention, who looked carefully at the world around them and noticed what worked, which plant oils conditioned hair, which mineral preparations cleaned it, which natural substances could dye it or set it or make it fragrant, who accumulated that knowledge carefully over generations, wrote it down, discussed it, improved it, passed it on. It tells us they were people who valued beauty, not as a superficial vanity but as a genuine good, as part of what made life worth living, part of what made a person a full and dignified participant in the world. To look well was not selfishness in ancient Egypt. It was a form of respect for oneself, for the people around you, for the gods who had created you. It tells us they were people who understood the connection between the physical and the spiritual, who knew, in a way that modern Western culture has largely forgotten, that the care we take with our bodies is a form of attention to the soul, that washing your hair with care and intention is not just a mechanical act but a ritual one, a small act of self-respect and self-blessing that has echoes in every religious and spiritual tradition on earth. And it tells us they were people very much like us, who worried about going gray and tried to prevent it, who dealt with lice and wished they did not, who wanted their hair to look its best for parties and ceremonies and ordinary days alike, who found, in the quiet rhythm of washing and oiling and combing, something peaceful and necessary and deeply human. The ancient Egyptians have been gone for thousands of years. Their language was lost and then found again. Their religion was replaced and then became the subject of endless fascination. Their art was buried under sand and then uncovered and placed in museums where millions of people stand before it in quiet wonder. But their hair, some of it, is still here. Preserved by accident or by love in the dry dark of tombs, it still exists in museums and university collections, small and intimate and real. And in it, if you know how to read it, is the story of someone's entire relationship with the world, the oils they used, the styles they chose, the care that was taken with them at the end. It is the most ordinary and the most extraordinary history in the world. Let your body grow heavy now. Let the images of ancient Egypt, the blue lotus on the water, the alabaster oil jar, the bronze razor catching morning light, the slow, careful fingers working oil through dark hair, let them drift and soften into the warm darkness of approaching sleep. You have traveled a very long way tonight, through 3,000 years and more of human life, and it has been a good journey, a gentle one, the kind of journey that leaves you feeling not tired but settled, quietly full. The Nile is still flowing. It has never stopped. Through every dynasty and every empire and every century and every year, the Nile has flowed north to the sea, carrying its rich dark silt, filling its marshes with lotus flowers, rising and falling with the eternal patience of something that does not need to hurry because it has always been here and will always be here. And somewhere in that long continuity, in that deep river of time, there was a woman kneeling beside a clay basin in the cool of a Theban morning, working oil through her dark hair with slow, deliberate fingers, listening to the first birds of the day, feeling the world begin again as it did every day, as it has done every day since the world began. She did not know that anyone would ever tell her story. She did not know that anyone, 3,000 years later, would find the traces she left behind, the oil residue in a small alabaster jar, the henna in a strand of preserved hair, the comb laid carefully beside a body dressed for eternity, and from those traces, reconstruct this single quiet morning in her life. But here we are, telling her story, and she deserved to have it told. Sleep well. The night is long and the world is old and you are safe within it. Close your eyes and let the Nile carry you, slow and dark and warm, all the way to morning.